A deadly attack at a nightclub in Istanbul, Turkey, leaving at least 39 people dead, dozens more wounded. As many as 600 people were jammed inside that nightclub, welcoming in the new year, when suddenly a lone gunman, allegedly in a Santa costume, killed a police officer standing guard, then burst inside, opening fire. The gunman still on the loose this hour, raising serious fears that more bloodshed on the first day of the year could be in store. John Huddy is live in our Middle East Bureau with the latest. John?
Yeah, Greg, we're starting to learn more details this hour. In fact, Turkey's prime minister said that the gunman left a gun behind at the scene of this morning's massacre and attack. And at this point, a manhunt is underway. And the concern is that this guy may try to pull something else off before authorities capture him, so time is really of the essence. The attack happened right around 1:15 a.m. local time in Istanbul at a place called Reyna nightclub in the Ortaköy district of Istanbul. I actually stayed there with our crew when we covered the attempted coup. Very busy area, very popular area, a lot of bars, a lot of restaurants right at the base of the Bosphorus Bridge. So hundreds of people were packed into the club at the time of the shooting, celebrating the new year. Now, officials say the attacker shot and killed a policeman, as you mentioned, out front, and a civilian before storming inside the club and spraying it with gunfire. Officials say that he was armed with a long-barreled weapon, though it's unclear what exactly that was. There have been some reports it was an AK-47, possibly some other type of assault weapon. We're still waiting for more information about that. But as you also mentioned, Greg, the death toll stands at 39 right now, with several people in critical condition. That number obviously could go up. At least about 70 people, meanwhile, were wounded, and at least 15 of the dead were foreign nationals, including an Arab-Israeli woman, according to officials. Now, Turkey's prime minister denied reports that the attacker was wearing a Santa Claus outfit, costume, but CCTV surveillance video shows that he was at one point wearing a Santa Claus hat, and it appears, according to officials, that he changed clothes once inside the club in order likely to escape. He was initially carrying a backpack, dressed in black outside the club, and then he changed, and he was seen leaving in a hat and other clothing after that. So far, we don't have an identity of him, and no group has claimed responsibility, but previous vicious attacks in Turkey have been carried out by ISIS or Kurdish militants. So again, that could change as far as the responsibility aspect. Today, Pope Francis condemned the attack in his New Year's message. Also, other world leaders are coming out against it, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, who said that Russia stands with Turkey in combating terrorism. Greg.
John Huddy live at our Mideast Bureau. John, thanks very much. For more.
Now, many countries have beefed up security for fear of terror attacks at the time of New Year's celebrations. German police have deployed 1,500 forces to the city of Cologne. Fireworks were banned from the area around Cologne's cathedral, and visitors had their bags searched by security guards. Thousands of policemen are also on patrol in other cities, especially Berlin, following the recent terrorist attack in the German capital. In the U.S., authorities have ordered New York's iconic Times Square encircled with 40-ton sand trucks and have deployed 7,000 police officers. British police have also deployed 3,000 forces to the streets of London to provide security. Thousands of police and military personnel have been deployed to protect civilians in Paris, Brussels, Madrid and Rome, among other cities.
I can't stress it enough. We're facing the real possibility of war against Russia in the next 20 days, before Trump takes over. I don't want to scare anyone, but that's what's happening, unfolding in front of us. It's the leadership, whoever has the levers of power in the United States now, wants to confront Russia aggressively and under threat of military force. The forces have been deployed for better than a year and a half to the borders of Russia, from the Balkans to the Crimean Peninsula, really. And there have been war games ongoing across the front, whether in the Balkans, East Europe, or in the South China Sea. And objectively speaking, if one is looking at American foreign policy as being a rational expression of American interests, war with Russia is insane. Even looking at it from the point of view of the interests of any human being on the planet, regardless of what they might think their interests are, war with Russia is a major catastrophe. Nevertheless, there must be someone at some point inside, at some position inside the elite here that makes policy that sees at least threatening Russia with war and or perhaps moving to war with Russia as a viable strategy, because it's being done openly.
Staying with Turkey, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says that his country will fight to the end against terrorism. He said terror groups are trying to destabilize Turkey by launching attacks against civilians, but the Turkish people will stand together in the face of such dirty games. Iran has condemned the gun attack in Istanbul and Saturday's bomb blast in Iraq's capital, Baghdad. Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Ghasemi said employing double standards on terrorism has allowed it to drag on. He stressed that unity among countries is the only way to fight terrorism. Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim has urged opposition groups to distance themselves from terrorists to pave the way for a political settlement to the ongoing conflict. He was speaking with senior Iranian official Ali Akbar Velayati in Tehran. Muallim also met with Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani. Saudi Arabia has bombed a home in Yemen's Marib province, killing 2 civilians. Another civilian was wounded. Riyadh has been bombing Yemen for 22 months now. Over 11,400 people, mostly civilians, have been killed so far. Millions more are facing dire humanitarian conditions. And security is beefed up across Europe and the U.S. during New Year celebrations for fear of terror attacks. Police forces have been deployed to New York and European cities including Berlin, London, and Rome. In some places, visitors had their bags searched by security guards.
At least 23 people were killed when fire broke out on a ferry near Jakarta, Indonesia on Sunday. More than 230 people were headed from the capital to a resort island when the boat's power generator short-circuited. Many passengers jumped into the sea, but the ferry only had 100 life jackets on board. Officials say 194 people were rescued, but as of Sunday morning, 17 were still missing.
Well, at least 2 security forces have been killed in a blast that hit Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Now, the victims died when a remotely controlled bomb targeted their vehicle on the main road to the town of Arish. Security officials say the vehicle was a specialized one that is used by the Egyptian military to intercept explosive devices signals. No group has as yet claimed responsibility, but previous attacks have been claimed by local branches of Daesh terrorists. Militancy has been ripe in the North Sinai Peninsula since the ouster of Egypt's ex-president Mohamed Morsi in 2013. The Egyptian army has waged a campaign of crackdown on extremist militants there.
China plans to raise its car emission standards to a new level. The new National 6th Emission Standard is one of the strictest in the world and will apply to all vehicles in 2020.
Air pollution from car emissions is becoming increasingly prominent, and that is pushing China to raise its emission standards.
The new National 6 standards have stricter limits and more requirements over testing procedures and the prevention of fuel vapors evaporating into the air. By the end of 2015, China had over 170 million automobiles. 40 cities now have more than 1 million cars each. 11 cities have more than 2 million.
South Korea is on alert after the avian influenza virus was found in cats. 12 people believed to have made contact with the cats are under quarantine. They include the owner and veterinary lab staff involved in retrieving the infected animals. The group has been treated with antiviral drugs and will be monitored for any symptoms for 10 days. The virus was found in a house cat and a stray cat sometime around Christmas in Pocheon, Gyeonggi-do province. It's the first case of mammals being infected with AI since a dog was reported to be infected with it back in 2015. According to an official at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, outside of Korea, there have been cases of cats being infected with bird flu, but no precedent of cats spreading the virus to humans. Still, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs plans to step up existing measures and prevent wild animals from entering poultry farms.
ISIS may have lost a lot of its income in 2016 thanks to coalition efforts to cripple its revenue streams. U.S. counterterrorism officials say ISIS is struggling to pay its fighters after airstrikes destroyed more than 1,200 ISIS oil tanker trucks over the past 15 months. The U.S. and Iraq also targeted Middle Eastern money-changing services that allow the terrorist organization to make purchases or pay its operatives. But experts say ISIS can change how it makes money.
Think of it as squeezing a balloon, not hard enough to pop it, but hard enough to squeeze it. If you squeeze it here, it's going to expand someplace else. We have seen in the past, and we can expect to see now, they will expand into other directions.
One of those directions is antiquities. ISIS already sells artifacts looted from areas it controls. It's released videos of buildings and statues being smashed, but other antiquities like coins and artwork can be sold on the black market for thousands of dollars. ISIS also makes hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue. Once it takes over a territory, it taxes residents on everything from crops to medicine to bank transactions. Even though ISIS is losing some of its revenue streams, that might not decrease its ability to carry out terrorist attacks because they're relatively inexpensive to finance. A Middle Eastern official told the Washington Post, "Yes, we're hurting them financially, but I'm not yet seeing such impacts on their covert activities." A controversial new law in California is removing all penalties for children soliciting or engaging in prostitution starting January 1st, and it sparked a fierce debate. Opponents of SB 1322 say it's essentially legalizing child prostitution. California Assemblyman Travis Allen said it's opening the door for more child prostitutes, and it renders law enforcement powerless to stop the cycle of abuse. But those in favor of the measure say it will cut down on child sex trafficking. They argue children in that situation should be helped rather than punished. If caught, children can be placed into civil protective custody. That way, social services can try to help them get out of the situation that got them there. Before, they could have faced fines, probation, or even jail time. The bill's author argued that there are no child prostitutes, only victims, because minors can't legally consent. Anyone caught forcing a child into prostitution or soliciting them is still subject to the previous laws. Even some in favor of the rule say California doesn't have enough money to effectively help the children that are detained. But the bill's co-author said California's 2017 budget will have an additional $20 million for social services to address that problem.
A high-level North Korean defector says Kim Jong-un is determined to complete development of nuclear weapons within a year, putting the North Korean nuclear threat front and center for Donald Trump.
My country.
The one-time deputy ambassador giving rare insight into the reclusive regime and saying he doesn't regret his defection.
Everyone in my family, thinks that it is the right decision.
The South Korean Yonhap news agency quotes the diplomat as saying Kim, at all costs, will try to have working nuclear weapons by the end of 2017.
You know there might be some problems when you have even the Rolling Stone questioning the hacking investigation. They've got a great piece out this morning that I recommend everyone read. And here's in part what they say. They say, like the WMD story, there's an element of salesmanship the government is using to push the hacking narrative that should make reporters nervous. They also go on to say that if there was a real smoking gun there, they had evidence, then President Obama would actually do something to hit a little bit harder. Sending out 35 of their folks ain't going to do anything.
Well, and, there's something that I don't hear reported very often. Everybody's all exercised about the fact that Russia supposedly got involved in our election, even though there's no evidence, none at all, that it had any impact on the election if they hacked into John Podesta's computer because he gave them his password.
Well, I personally, I'm no fan of Vladimir Putin. I think he looks in the mirror and he aspires to be Vladimir the Great. He'd love to put the USSR back together again.
The situation that we face, the reality with Russia, happens to be very complex. Right now we're talking cybersecurity, cyber attacks, but I just got back from Afghanistan yesterday. In that region, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, Turkey, it's a challenging map, the entire world right now with those challenges. So isolated to what's gone on over the course of the last couple days, I do believe Putin is outsmarting President Obama with his response. He has been allowed to take the high road, be magnanimous. It's unfortunate. Now we need to move forward.
Is it really taking the high road if you're the one who's first accused of starting this whole thing by hacking into our election system?
Oh, this is just a very, it's like a complicated inside baseball game that Putin, with his messaging, using Twitter, communicating with the rest of the world. I mean, you look at the realignment right now in the Middle East, where Syria there's a truce being negotiated with Russia and Turkey, and the United States isn't even involved. So I think it's more of a messaging outsmarting over the course of the last couple days. But it's impossible to defend the guy, though.
Citing Russia's embassy, Russian news agencies reported Russian diplomats who were expelled by order of U.S. President Barack Obama left Washington on Sunday. RIA quoted the embassy's press service as saying, "The plane took off, everyone has left." Because of the hacking of U.S. political groups during the 2016 presidential election, Obama ordered the expulsion of 35 Russian suspected spies and imposed sanctions on 2 Russian intelligence agencies, saying he would consider the actions of President-elect Donald Trump, who takes office on January 20th, when deciding on further steps in Russia-U.S. relations. Russian President Vladimir Putin decided not to expel anyone in retaliation.
A Vermont utility company found Russian hacking malware on one of its computers. This after officials confirmed that a code used with the Russian hacking operation was detected. And although this was not connected to the company's electrical grid system, it still does expose the nation's vulnerability to foreign threats.
Earlier, we spoke to our Middle East analyst, Meir Kavadanfar, in Tel Aviv, and asked him whether such attacks would have had any impact on the country's political stability.
When you have a coup followed by such wide-scale arrests involving thousands of people, that undermines the stability of the country economically. And we've seen it last year. For the first time, the Turkish economy shrank instead of growing last year. The value of the Turkish economy, the Turkish currency, the lira, collapsed by 20%. This is a considerable sum. And when you have the economy of a country being undermined in such a great way, that brings also political instability, because when people are not investing in your economy, it brings unemployment. People join extremist forces because of it, and also it makes the cost of fighting a war of terror much more expensive. So yes, the events have brought political instability, but much more in the economy. The terror attacks have hurt the Turkish economy far more than the Turkish political system.
Gun shops and gun runners accountable, and those who purchase the guns and sell them illegally, and accountable for the death and the destruction they are directly responsible for.
CBS Chicago reports hundreds of people marched on Saturday to Chicago's Michigan Avenue, carrying crosses representing murder victims in the city. Those carrying them stretched for about a city block. They included both family members and strangers. The reading of each name was the only sound. The memorial was organized by Reverend Michael Pfleger, a Chicago priest. Pfleger said, "Until everybody in Chicago decides it's their problem, we're not going to end it." According to the Chicago Police Department, there were 762 murders, 3,550 shooting incidents, and 4,331 shooting victims in the year alone.